Bring in Nile Gardiner, who is a director at the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom and conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Appreciate you joining us on the show this morning. With this defeat of Theresa May's Brexit deal, we're now looking at a plan B potentially to be brought forward over the next 3 days. But you have said that the best course of action now would be a no-deal Brexit. Explain that to me. Why do you think a no-deal Brexit would be good for the UK, and since we're a business channel, for the markets?
Well, I think firstly, I have to say that this was a very humiliating defeat for the Prime Minister today. And if she goes back to the House of Commons with a proposal for a similar deal on the table, I think it's going to be soundly rejected by Parliament again. And the prospect of any serious renegotiation, I think, with the European Union is close to zero right now. After all, I think the European Commission has made it abundantly clear they're not interested in renegotiating the EU withdrawal agreement. And so I think the best course of action for the Prime Minister right now is to announce that Britain is preparing for a no-deal Brexit, make sure the preparations are in place for March 29th, move forward on that basis. After all, a no deal is the default position here. Britain is definitely going to leave the European Union on March 29th. It's set in legislation. Unless the government falls, a no-deal exit, I think, is the most likely scenario here. And I think a no deal as well, actually, is the only way to ensure and guarantee British sovereignty and self-determination, something that Theresa May's deal did not actually offer, which is why 118 Conservative MPs voted against their own party leader today. So I hope that Theresa May has got the message loud and clear that her EU withdrawal deal, as it stands, is dead in the water, and she does have to look at realistic alternatives.
There is an alternative here that is not a no-deal Brexit, though, which is to ask for an extension of Article 50 and put this up for a second referendum. Why not go for that?
Well, I think that would be really an astonishing betrayal of the 17.4 million Britons who voted to leave the EU in 2016. And the idea of a second referendum is very, very heavily rejected, I think, within the Conservative Party. There's no support for that. And so as long as you have a Conservative government, there's not going to be a second referendum. And the vote of no confidence, which is going to be held later today in the House of Commons, I expect that the Prime Minister will win that vote of confidence. You're not going to see a Labour government emerging in the coming months. So I think the prospects for a second referendum are absolutely going nowhere at all, and very unrealistic, I think, as long as you have a Conservative government in place.
And Niall, help me understand that argument, though, about why this would be a betrayal of the original vote, because I certainly understand that there were voters who turned out who expressed their desire to leave the EU, and yet my understanding, if it's a second referendum, and so much of this, of course, would be in the way the referendum is framed, wouldn't voters get to have a say again? I mean, what is the betrayal if the same voters can go to the polls and express where they want to stand or where they want the UK to go?
Well, the EU referendum in 2016 was presented as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Britons to have their say over their future in Europe. And the British government, when they offered the referendum, declared categorically, emphatically, that they would respect the will of the British people, whatever the outcome. And David Cameron, the Prime Minister at that time, who of course opposed Britain leaving the EU, made it abundantly clear that Britain would implement Brexit if the British people voted for it. And so this is exactly what the British government has pledged to do. It must abide and honour by that agreement. And the idea that the British people should vote endlessly over and over again on the Brexit issue, I think is completely the wrong direction for Britain to take. It would cause huge instability. And I believe it's absolutely essential that the British government abides by a democratic vote, implements what is in place in legislation. Parliament overwhelmingly voted in favour of implementing Brexit on March 29, 2019. Parliament has to respect that and move forward with it.
Niall, I do understand what you're trying to say and the message that you're bringing across here. But why would a delay in March 29, in that March 29 deadline, be such a significant negative? And I'm still struggling on Kiko's question as well, as to you were talking about the instability that you know, additional votes in the plural would cause, but we're talking about a second referendum, not a third or a fourth, and things have certainly and substantially changed since that first referendum was taken. So on the other hand, isn't this a chance to give the British people another vote, or a time to have their say, now that there's probably a greater understanding out there of what a Brexit would actually entail?
Well, I think the British people knew exactly what they were voting for with regard to Brexit. And so the Vote Leave campaign, the official Brexit campaign, made it very clear that Britain would leave the single market and the customs union, that Britain would take back full control of its borders and its trade, its laws and its own destiny. And I think the British people were very, very well informed about exactly what Brexit entailed. And I think that, you know, the main momentum behind a second referendum, dubbed a people's vote, is to overturn the Brexit vote, actually. And so I think it's vitally important that the British government respects democracy and implements what the British people have voted for. And this is the declared position of the British government. It's also important to bear in mind as well, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has not himself personally committed to a second referendum, although many of his own MPs have done so. And I think that you know, all of the political parties in the last general election, all of the major parties, with the exception of the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Nationalists, actually campaigned on a platform of implementing Brexit. And so I would expect that they should all actually implement that decision.
US-UK trade deal, you believe, could be in place by the end of this year, by the end of 2019. Why are you so optimistic that could happen?
Well, I've interacted very closely with the US administration, the Trump administration, on trade matters, and also with the British government as well. In fact, I hosted the UK's International Trade Secretary Liam Fox in Washington back in July. There's tremendous momentum for a US-UK free trade agreement, and it is the official policy of the Trump administration to move forward with negotiating such an agreement once Britain leaves the European Union. There's already a very powerful US-UK trade caucus, which has 19 senators as members. It's a bipartisan caucus. It's growing at a terrific rate. And I think that, you know, there's tremendous optimism here in Washington with regard to a US-UK free trade deal. And as Stephen Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, made it clear in Davos last year, Britain would be at the front of the queue for a US-UK free trade deal. And that's in significant contrast to Barack Obama's statement that Britain would be at the end of the queue for a free trade deal. And so you have a very different approach taken by the present US administration as opposed to the Obama administration. And, you know, this is a US administration that is very pro-British, it's very pro the special relationship, and it is a big supporter of a US-UK trade deal. So I would have every confidence in the possibility of a US-UK free trade deal being implemented by the end of 2019, provided Britain does leave the EU on March 29th, and provided that Britain is fully outside of the customs union, which is something that Theresa May's deal actually prevented. So a no-deal Brexit would enable a US-UK free trade agreement to be implemented.
The situation should become clear in the next couple of months or so. Niall, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for joining us. Nile Gardiner there from the Heritage Foundation.